What's the worst mistake you've seen someone make in their job? Plant manager let the safety guy go because they didn't believe safety was a full-time job and wanted to cut back on company spending and decided the supervisors could do all the safety audits, training, keep the building up to code. Not even a week later, two guys got their arms lost working on a machine that they weren't trained, certified on, and the back building caught fire due to pallets and cardboard boxes being stacked in the wrong area near the furnace. Story 2. One time a member of my dev team was given a task to cancel a few credit cards, less than 10, directly in the database. They canceled 17 million. The mistake was only caught when the company helpline started to receive millions of calls the next day from all over the country, with people asking why their cards were not working. Story 3. Not sure if this counts, but during my first internship at a chemical plant, I was given the task of reading through safety violation reports and sorting them. This turned out to be way more interesting than I initially expected, as the reports were riddled with accounts of sheer stupidity in the workplace. Here are a few of the most memorable incidents. A woman accidentally glued her own eye shut after trying to reattach a fake nail with industrial-strength, heavy-duty super glue and then subsequently rubbing her eye. Someone somehow accidentally mixed an acidic compound from an unmarked bottle into their beverage and drank it. Not as much stupid as it is fascinating. A man working atop some scaffolding forgot to attach his safety harness and fell from 20 feet onto his back. The report stated that he stood up, somehow okay, after falling from that high, and came back to work the next day, good as new. Story 4. Saw a guy get zapped pretty bad when he stuck a tool in the wrong place on a big dryer at a hotel where I worked. We had asked him if he should cut the power first, and he said, "Nah, don't need to." For a moment after, we thought he was pass. Story 5. A girl on the till had a guy come up and buy a $2 pack of gum with a $100 note, saying sorry. He didn't have anything smaller. She gave him his $98 change, and he left. He came back in a few minutes later and said, "Hey, I found a $2 coin in my car. Can I have my $100 back?" So she did it. It was a small shop, so it was a tough scam to fall for. She also managed to lock herself out of her own car while it was running, but parked in a way that no one could get in or out of the car park. Story 6. Company director sent his travel plans for a work convention to the communal printer in the staff room. Bet him and the other director would have had a lovely time. Hotel at presidential suite in Barcelona for a week sounded nice. His wife thought so too and was furious she wasn't going, also surprised that him and lady director were sharing a room for a week, and that when she looked into it, there was no convention. Things went south pretty fast, and now the company is no more. Story 7. Taught preschool for 8 years before the pandemic. It's protocol to count the children before moving from one room to another to make sure no one gets left behind. Had a coworker on her phone. Didn't count kids, and had left behind a child in the toy closet. Kid was 2 years old and trapped, screaming and crying in a dark toy closet for 20 minutes before a teacher passing by the empty classroom heard her. My coworker didn't even get a slap on the wrist, and management never told parents. This same coworker forced her class of 2-year-olds to get dressed themselves for outside play in the winter, so one time a little girl ended up playing outside in the Minnesota snow without boots on for 10 minutes before my coworker noticed. Story 8. Newish employee deleted the root directory for the SFTP server. Took the server guys about a day and a half to fully restore it, with all files since the previous night backup lost. Same employee did the exact same thing again a few weeks later. Still had a job when I left somehow. Story 9. I worked for a startup cider manufacturer in my second year of college. Normally, after a day of production, we have to sanitize all the metal components in hot caustic wash. There are hundreds of pieces, so it takes a while. Anyways, our managers left us an hour before our shift ended to clean up. I had to go do some e-commerce end-of-day stuff before leaving, so my coworker wrapped up the cleanup. On Monday, we returned to the warehouse burned down. Apparently, he left the caustic heater on all weekend and it caused a chemical fire. Everything was destroyed and it ended up bankrupting the company. He dropped out of his co-op degree after. He wouldn't be able to get recommended for another placement. Story 10. Before retiring, I was a branch manager for my state's DMV. Suddenly, one of the other managers is off sick for a few days. Then it became a week, 2 weeks. Then the auditors completed their investigation and she was gone. Turns out she was accepting bribes from aspiring truck drivers so they would pass the written test. She was taking in an additional $250 a week. The dumb part? The pay was decent, and the benefits were fantastic. So she gave up decent pay, fantastic benefits, and a really nice retirement for extra spending money. Then there was the assistant manager who would pocket anywhere from $750 to $1,500 a week, so a better payoff. But she was removing it from the day's cash receipts. She had only ever worked for the DMV, working her was up from clerk. She had no idea that there are accounting systems within accounting systems. The bank would send over deposit discrepancy reports, which she would blithely pitch, not realizing that the same exact report was also sent to our central office. The wheels of state government turn slowly. So she was able to do this for over a year. But once those wheels start, they do not stop. She ended up going to prison and ordered to pay over $30,000 in restitution. The full manager also got fired because the investigation revealed that he was rarely in the office and left everything up to the assistant manager. Story 11. A coworker lost the same finger twice by pointing at a gear on a machine. The first time to show a problem, the second time to show how he lost his finger. Story 12. Working with a tree cutting service in Tampa, I was asked by the boss to ascend a nearby tree and cut some limbs. After seeing how close they were to power lines, I refused. He got really pissed off, yelled at me to clean up the area. Then he sent up Dallas. Dallas put on his climbing spikes, roped up the tree, and started cutting. I was worried and kept watching him as I picked up limbs. Sure enough, he leaned back and before I could yell, put his sweaty bare back right against the power lines. A bright blue flash arced across his back and his body guided away and slammed against the tree trunk. He bounced off and back into the wires. And again, finally his spikes got dislodged and he fell out of the tree, falling until his safety line snapped taut, leaving him dangling upside down. I thought he'd pass, but a moment later he started moaning, then screaming. "I'm on fire!" he yelled. We lowered him to the ground to the sound of sirens approaching. A neighbor had seen what happened and called ambulance. A nasty black mark curved across his back and the current had surged down his legs and through his boot heels, seeking out ground. I quit at the end of the day. Story 13. A networker once sent an advisory to the entire company about an email several people had received with a malware link. She did so by forwarding the actual email with the link. Story 14. Printed 500 copies of her gas bill on the company printer. The printer only has enough tray capacity for 250 copies, so she had to have reloaded the paper at least once. Story 15. I had a girl that worked for me that one day had a guy try to pay with a $100 bill. We all knew that we did not take any bill over $20, but she didn't listen sometimes. This time she took the bill, and when she was cashing out her draw, the smart safe didn't take the $100 bill. I asked if she checked it, and she of course said yes. I looked at the bill and noticed it said movie prop on the bill. She somehow missed it. Story 16. There was a company in rural New York in the late 1960s that took scrap metal, melted it down in big coal-fired crucibles and made home decor pieces, doorstops that looked like little dogs, bookends, that kind of thing. Not a huge profit margin, but their materials were cheap and they had a steady market. An industrial consultant convinced them to transition to electric furnaces. Significant upfront expense, but much lower ongoing operating costs. The consultant even designed the new electric crucibles for the company. The company president had been thinking of expanding operations, so asked the industrial consultant to double the size of the electric crucible designs. The consultant did so, but made a mistake with the cube-square law in designing the supports for the crucibles. The first time the double-sized, but about 4 times as heavy crucibles were filled with scrap and fired up. They collapsed, flooding the factory floor with molten pot metal and chunks of wrecked equipment. The company went straight to bankruptcy. Story 17. I was working in a tool and die shop in my early 20s, and I was watching an old guy who was perpetually drunk pound in an injector pin into a plastic injection mold with a big piece of steel round stock. Well, as he was pounding the pin in, he missed the pin and hit his thumb. He was in such pain he pissed himself. Then, to make matters worse, he got fired for being drunk on the job. Story 18. I had a coworker send an email trashing his boss. Of course, since his boss was on his mind, he sent it to them instead of who he meant it to go to. He didn't get fired, but it definitely made things awkward for a while. Story 19. When a colleague and I were both interviewing for the same promotion, we had to do a 10-minute presentation on what areas of the business were underperforming and what we would do to address it. He misread the question and had prepared a presentation on where he was underperforming, what he would do to address it. I got the promotion. Story 20. When I was working at a travel agency, my coworker sent a honeymooning couple to Helena, Montana, HLN, instead of Honolulu, Hawaii, HNL. They found out when they touched down in Montana. Story 21. Once, I served drinks to a little girl and her mom. I accidentally got them mixed up. The mom ordered a mixed drink with bourbon and the daughter said her drink tasted funny. Story 22. In my first year as a doctor, one of the second-year doctors accidentally ordered a CT scan on the wrong patient and it got done. This is looked on really poorly because you're exposing a patient to unnecessary radiation. Bizarrely, the CT revealed an entirely asymptomatic early-stage cancer, potentially saving the patient's life. Story 23. Had a buddy whose wife and he would play Marathon WoW sessions into the early. Your first mistake was when he was caught by the network admins playing WoW from work on the company laptop. After that happened, he uninstalled the game and didn't play from the office, but would be on voice chat to guide his clannies in raids while on the clock. Last straw was when, after one of those marathon sessions, he fell asleep at his desk, and unfortunately for him, our department head was strolling by and noticed him out like a light at his desk. He got canned that day. Really dumb because they had a young teen daughter to support, And while they lived paycheck to paycheck, it was a decent one, like upwards of $60,000, database developer. Story 24, I'm a car mechanic. Had a colleague once who had a pretty small job on an engine, about an hour or two and costs like $50. Made a mistake, quite big, but also quite common and easy to make. It's the well crap category, not something to drag him through the mud for. Started fixing it, made an even bigger mistake. At this point, we even had to outsource some issues we couldn't fix in-house. We were looking for about 2 weeks and $500 on us, of course, not the customer, but it was still okay. We got everything back. He started putting the engine back together. All done first run, whoopsie, another big problem, whole engine apart. Broke something again, outsourced, expensive. Overall, it was about a month-long procedure, hitting $1,000. Once it was done, he got fired. He got away with a lot, but at one point, it was way too much. Story 25. Told a newbie to clean the steel panels on the deep fryers, expecting them to wipe them down with a cloth. They instead grabbed a jug of water and decided to rinse it, with water going into the still hot oil. Yanked them back so fast, I nearly gave them whiplash. And an answer from Dad. A colleague dismantled a machine to fix it without first checking the pipes were cleared. The pipes were full of melted sugar. Very hot. He got horrific burns. Story 26. Work in a brewery. One morning, a brewer went to run a clean-in-place on a 60-barrel vessel. After the vessels are empty, they usually are under some significant pressure, usually anywhere from 5 to 15 pounds per square inch. Guy did not degas the fermenter before taking the sample port off. These vessels had 2 ports on them, and we put a 1-inch cap on one port and a Perlix sample faucet on the other. He starts with the stainless steel cap. All of the pressure came out like a bullet. I could hear from the other side of a rather large facility. Dude got lucky and the cap barely missed his head. He did get a bunch of yeast and hop residue in his eyes, as his safety glasses were on top of his head and not covering his eyes. I drove him to the hospital and he's okay. Just got fired a couple weeks later. Story 27. Last year, Guy pass at his house. Daughter calls police for a well-being check. Police show up. Dad's pass. Police called medical examiner, but he's old and died of natural causes. No need to bring him in the me. The police call the daughter and tell her to call the funeral home. Funeral home tells officer their route to the house. 5 days later. Funeral comes to medical examiner to pick up body. I'm like, Guy never came into the building. He was released to the funeral home. Let me go figure out what happened. Several phone calls later, we find out the funeral home forgot to pick up the guy and he was still at the house. Story 28. A local dealership was promoting a contest where they would give away a truck. I was driving around with my parents, who were visiting from out of state, when we hear the commercial for the giveaway on the radio. The drawing was in about 15 minutes, and we were right there, so we stopped in and put our names in the collection bin. I watched them take the bin upstairs out of sight of the crowd. They had clearly selected the winner in the back room and announced that if the winner was not present, they will contact them for the winnings. So they chose a winner that was clearly from out of state. But what they didn't realize was that it was my mom visiting for the weekend. She walks right up to the announcer, showed her license, and said, "I'm so happy I won the truck." The look on their faces was priceless. For the next couple of weeks, the dealership tried everything to not give us the truck. It was clear that they had no idea how to even give away the truck, but we prevailed. And I'm happy to say it, we love the truck. Story 29. I work for a knit company, and my client is one of the biggest consumer goods providers on the planet. One time, a project manager tried to deploy a 60-man-day project in a single week without any quality control whatsoever and ended up implementing discounts on products which weren't supposed to have them. So as you can imagine, things got super ugly super fast. Client lost about $1 billion in revenue, seriously. And our leadership got involved, fought for several months. It happened in our contract year with them too, and we almost lost them over this incident. The PM who delivered the project was first placed on leave, then eventually moved to another account. Story 30. One time when I was the production manager of a weekly newspaper, I accidentally sent the previous week's edition to the printer. They didn't catch it until it went through the presses. Ended up costing the paper about $85,000. I worked through the weekend off the clock to help fix the problem and minimize the damage, so they didn't fire me. Definitely the worst mistake I ever made on the job. Story 31. I'm a home appliance installer and was out working a pretty big job at some 20,000 square foot mansion. They had another installation team working on a second kitchen in the basement. One of these guys was drilling the mounting holes for the dishwasher into their granite countertop. Don't do this, okay? And drilled them too small. So when we went to secure it, a massive 4-foot chunk of granite split off and smashed into the floor, breaking a couple tiles in the process. Dude sounded like Yosemite Sam with his cussing, and the customer was pissed. Story 32. Adventures I'm Hazmat. When things go wrong, they go really wrong. There was the time we were doing an asbestos removal job in the pump house under one of those 250,000-gallon water tanks you see elevated 50 feet in the air. William broke a pipe fitting before the shutoff valve. so no way to shut it off. Asbestos waste washed out the containment, through the deacon and out the door, was everywhere, and that's how William earned the name Quarter-Mill Bill. Have more. Story 33. Roger, the recovering addict who lived in our basement, offered his services as a car mechanic on Craigslist for cheap. One day, he took a frat bro's brand new BMW to fix a minor issue and ended up getting ducked up on methadone and taking the entire engine apart. Roger did not remember how to put it back together, but he tried. He got about halfway through and then decided to reward his persistence with a little substances as a treat. Poor frat bro came to pick up his ride and found the keys in the ignition with the extra parts left over after the rebuild piled in his trunk. Roger is now in prison. Story 34. I got a couple stories. I saw someone drop a piece of jewelry into the fry oil and try to grab it as it dropped and sank there a hand and half their forearm in 450-degree oil. They ran out screaming, and we never saw them again. Working at a tire shop, I saw someone use an old bottle jack to lift a semi, and then as they began taking the tires off, the jack failed, and the whole trailer sank down onto their legs, pinning them under the tire. It's important to note how you take tires off a semi-truck. You lift it a couple inches and sit on the ground with your legs around the bottom of the tire, and use your legs to lift it while you pull it off. Crazily enough, though, the guy wasn't hurt too bad for one big reason. He was an enormous guy. We called him Big Joe because he was 7 foot 2 inches and wasn't just tall, but proportionally bigger in every way. It was like someone clicked the drag and expand box on him. Any normal-sized person would have had their legs crushed, but he just had some nasty bruises. Another story from tires. One of my former managers passed away by an exploding industrial tire. There have locking rings that hold the tire on the rim, but if they aren't set on just right, they will blow off when you air the tire up, often with enough force to go right through you, and then still keep going with enough force to embed itself in steel or concrete, which is what happened to him. I didn't see this, just heard of it later on. Story 35. In the Army, I was assigned to a field artillery unit. During a training exercise, a gunner in our unit didn't align his tick marks up with the collimator correctly, and his tank ended up shooting a dummy round into a formation of soldiers hitting 4 or 5, and they pass. If it were a live round, the whole unit would have been decimated. Dude got 15 years or more in Leavenworth. Story 36. Went to a new GYN about a lump in my breast. Immediate ultrasound, then silence. I called the office, and the office person said, "Oh, you're fine." I said, "Really?" "I'm asking about the ultrasound." "Yeah, it's fine." 3 years later, my PCP asked if I had any lumps during a yearly exam. I said, "Yes, it's right there in my records." Same medical group and all have access to the same info. 2 days later, I'm diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Story 37. I live in Ireland. I used to work in a store that accepted sterling, British pounds, to be more convenient for tourists. So everyone was trained on sterling and euro, our currency, extensively, even though most of us were familiar with it from going up north or to the UK. A girl working on the till accepted a completely different European currency, thinking it was sterling. It had the image of a king on it, a different language and color than sterling. I still can't understand how she did it. It was in no way similar. Nice girl, but she had lived in the UK at one point. Story 38. In 13 years of dealing cards at multiple casinos, the answer to this question is me. This story will only interest gamblers, so be warned. You might get lost. Dealing blackjack. 2 of our highest VIP members. Guy has a $20,000 bet. Gets aces, goes to split. Now it's $40,000. First card, he gets a 9 for 20. When I went back to pull the next card for his other ace, the card was halfway stuck. So I ended up pulling the card behind the first card, which was his original card that he was supposed to get. And of course, it was a face card to give him 21. Now I just stopped. Listen, if this was a $25 bet, I would have just kept going. But when it's high limit, it's a guarantee thing that surveillance is watching my table. Also, we, dealers, can be responsible for these mistakes, as in the casino can take me to court and try to prove I was colluding with the patron. So I just stop. Call over the supervisor and ask him to get the pit boss over because this kid barely has any skin in the game and I need someone higher up. So my boss comes over and I whisper the situation. His eyes lit up like a Christmas tree and couldn't believe what had happened. He then calls surveillance and they confirm that I had indeed pulled the wrong card. So now the player gets the original card, which was like a 4 or 5, I get his face card, and I make 21. Damn, balls did I ever almost puke in my mouth. At the end of the day, I got a nice clap on the back for staying on my game, but I got this massive $0 tip from the 2 guys who are the most awesome people to deal to. And I respect that 100%. It was my fault. At the end of the day, the hand played out exactly as it should of, however, me making 21 and taking away his face card really killed the night. Story 39. I heard there was this guy who had to clean a load of paella pans by tying them down and letting the tide of the sea do the work. It was a beach restaurant in Spain. Apparently, he forgot to tie them and almost every one of them floated away. Sounds funnier when he tells it though. Story 40. I worked at a nightclub. One of my colleagues had called in sick, but he wasn't sick. He was going to party with his friends instead. And where did they go? To the nightclub, of course. You should have seen the baffled face on my boss when he realizes my colleague was there. My boss fired him on the spot. Story 41. Forget they had substances in their pocket while crossing a border. This led the Austrian Border and Customs Police to open up about 100 cans of exposed film stock that was in the van the guy was driving. Film stock from a very expensive film shoot the week before. The result was second unit had to go back and reshoot an entire action set piece for the film. Line producer told me the mistake cost about 5 million euros. Story 42. 1. Unix sysadmin I knew created a vacation or auto-reply file and didn't put any restrictions so that it would reply to each email that was sent to the user's mailbox. He also did this for another employee, and both of them were on a mailing list. So when someone sent an email to that list, both vacation files repeatedly kept replying to each other, which brought down the mail server. It wasn't me. I swear it was someone else. Really, not me. If it's not .vacation and something else, please forgive me. It's been over 20 years. Story 43. I used to work as a maid in a motel, and our usual supervisor was out sick. The person who took her place that day mixed ammonia and bleach in a window cleaner bottle and poisoned me with ammonia chloride gas fumes when I sprayed the bathroom mirror. If the maintenance man hadn't come by and found me unconscious, it could have hit me. For several months after I had respiratory problems, vision issues, and a lingering burn in my nose and throat. Story 44. Used to be a supervisor for a security company. One of my guards was working a truck gate. They let a truck leave with an empty trailer that was actually loaded. The load on that trailer was valued at almost $1 million. She was damned lucky I was able to figure out how to get in touch with the driver and get that load back. Story 45. Me. I put washer fluid in the coolant tank when I was new to oil change. Customer got a free coolant flush. No harm done. And I learned to pay better attention when under the hood. Coworker. Told a customer they could go in the middle of their oil change because he assumed it was done and didn't check that new oil had been put in. Customer drove off and totaled their engine because there was no oil. Company had to pay for new engine. Coworker somehow didn't get fired. And once, a coworker almost started putting oil in before I had the drain plug in or a new filter on. I had to yell for them to stop. They're supposed to ask if the person in the pit was ready for oil, and they just didn't, I guess. Story 46. My first day on my own in my job of identity and access management. We got a ticket to remove access for someone. I was excited and got the whole thing done without someone watching over me. I accidentally removed all the access for the requester. Of course, it was near the end of the day. I was scrambling to make phone calls and such to get her access back. Story 47. I worked at a car dealership several years back. There was a new mechanic who was there barely a week and tasked to go fill all the brand new top-of-the-line, biggest diesel trucks on the lot. Diesel. The guy filled all the trucks with regular gas at the gas station down the street, then drove them back to the lot. He was fired pretty quickly after that. Story 48. Clerk tells on self for stealing a bunch of money and inventory because they mistakenly thought our supervisor had seen them in the act. I was an assistant manager for a large gas station, convenience store. One night on my day off, one of my clerks calls and says, "Hey, how bad is it if..." Supervisor just saw me chug a beer in the cooler. I said, "Well, you're drinking a beer, which you stole on the clock, in a building where it is illegal to consume alcohol, and you're 18, so pretty bad." Clerk said, "Supervisor, might not have seen me, but I was just checking." I said, "You do realize that I'm one of your managers, right? You just told your manager that you stole a beer and drank it on the clock?" Clerk just hung up the phone. So I immediately called the store manager and conference in the supervisor. I said, Supervisor, this is going to sound like a strange question, but did you see anything unusual in the cooler today when you visited my store?" Supervisor, "No, I wasn't there to walk your store. I was just picking something up to transfer to another store." Me, "Okay, well, I just got a call from clerk," explained the phone call. Obviously, this kid is getting fired. Anyone should have known that they were not going to have a job anymore. Due to corporations' love of paperwork, we still have to set up a meeting to have a conversation with the clerk and give them their termination paperwork. Most of the time, when someone knows they're getting fired, they just never show up. This kid is not most people. Clerk shows up in uniform, ready to work for their next shift, like nothing happened. Clerk, super store manager, and I all go into the back room to have our talk. Super, we need to discuss what happened yesterday in the cooler when I came by the store. Clerk, "Oh, I didn't think you saw that." Super, I didn't. When you called, op was required to tell me and store manager about it. When we checked the cameras, we can clearly see you drinking the beer. Clerk, "There's cameras in there?" "The cameras are not hidden." Clerk, "So, did you guys see all of the other stuff too?" Super, and I look at each other, then Super says, "Yes, we have seen everything, but we want you to tell us about it all, and then if you're honest, we can discuss what happens next." The clerk then goes on a long list of every time he's drank, smoked, and stole cash from the last 6 months. Super told the clerk to go home for the day, and we'd call to set up a follow-up meeting. Now we knew cash was missing, and our internal security was looking into it. But the rest is generally ignored due to inventory loss from theft and damage. And the fact that no one has time to sit and watch video of every second of every day, 24-hour store, just hoping that you might happen to see something on one of the 30 cameras in the store. Armed with the info from this clerk, our security team went back and reviewed every shift this clerk had worked for the last 6 months. Clerk was stealing beer, Swishers, Black & Milds, cigarettes every shift, and was pocketing around $300 a week. Clerk had managed to find a pretty sneaky way of hiding the cash. Theft involving change that was left on gas pumps and gift card transfers, which actually led to a change in how we handled those transactions at a corporate level. A couple of days later, Clerk is scheduled to return. I'm thinking there's no way this kid shows. I was wrong. Clerk arrives in uniform, ready for the shift. We all go back to have our meeting, where Super lays out every incident we have evidence of, and explains that the clerk's employment is officially terminated. Clerk is shocked. I imagine they were also shocked when the company took them to court for the theft of around $8,000 in cash and inventory. Story 49. A tourism boat bought nearly $1,800 worth of groceries and wine for their guests. One of the new hires charged it to the wrong account. There were hundreds of dollars of weighed items on the order, so it had to be entirely redone, and it took all day, because it wasn't noticed until the end of the day, and the tour boat had already left the docks. He had to fiddle with different items on the scales to match the weights on the invoice. It was awful. Story 50. My manager at my previous job mixed up the class dates for employees of a very large client, and it affected their billing. Of course, none of us, including our manager, knew she did it at the time. I had to find out due to the barrage of emails and angry phone calls I got from said client. After assuring them I'd look into it, I had looked through a long email chain just to find out it was our manager who made the mistake. I told her, and her reply was for me to fix it. It frustrated me to no end because she always lectured me on making little mistakes, and I had to fix them myself. This mistake, however, was huge as it took months to figure out what went wrong, and I already had to deal with the brunt of the client's anger and frustration. There was no accountability on my manager's end. Not even a thank you or any kind of appreciation for me for sorting it out. Glad I left that place. Story 51. Back in 2010, Will Gottschall, one of the best law firms in the world, represented the debtors in the WAMU bankruptcy. My firm represented an investor that had filed a lawsuit on behalf of a class of warrant holders, alleging that the warrants created a debt obligation instead of equity. The case was all or nothing. If we were correct and it was debt, the class of holders got a decent recovery. If WAMU was correct and they were equity, the class got wiped out with nothing. Whale thought our argument was such a long shot. They gave the lead on the matter to a 14-year associate. For reference, partnership track is 10 years. So we're talking about an attorney that was still slogging through the 3,000 billable hours a year as an associate trying desperately to finally make partner, but hadn't been successful. So he wasn't the best of the best at Whale anyway. The governing document relating to the warrants was an old publicly filed warrant purchase agreement from a bank. That was a predecessor to WAMU. Neither Whale nor we had the signed physical copy of the agreement because it was almost 20 years old. So we had to reference an old 8K that had a TXT file of a draft of the agreement appended to it. Whale's associate filed a motion to dismiss our lawsuit and asserted that the version appended to that 8K was the final version. We litigated for months on various issues relating to that motion, assuming that that was the pertinent document, because Whale had represented under penalty of perjury that it was. On the day of the hearing, my client and I were reviewing the old Edgar docket and realized that there was a version of the agreement that had been publicly filed a few months after the one that Whale's associate claimed was the final version. It was buried as a text file as one of numerous exhibits to some seemingly unrelated document that didn't even reference the agreement. The two versions of the agreement were identical, except for the signatures, the dates, and one word. May had been changed to shall in one of the operative provisions. The difference invalidated Whale's primary argument on its face. We walked into court and dropped the bombshell to the judge and everyone there. Essentially, Will had spent months and hundreds of man-hours arguing over the wrong version of a document. And the right version meant we were sure to win. During the hearing, I looked over and saw the face of the associate. He was in shock. I don't think he believed what was happening. The judge ended up adjourning the hearing because of this newfound evidence, and we all took the train home. The next day, we got an email from a partner at Whale. He had taken over the case from the associate. When I saw the email, I checked Whale's website. The associate had already been fired. A month later, the judge issued the opinion denying the motion to dismiss, which was enough to increase the price of the warrants our client held from like 10 cents a share to somewhere in the $90 range. Our client immediately sold all of its warrants and we withdrew from the case. It ended up being one of the most high-profile victories in my career. To date, anyway. Story 52. Oh, another one. Worked at a large casino in a large tourist city. The penthouse garden was being redone, and the gardener has put tarpaulins down to protect the tiles. A storm rolled through, and the tarps were blocking the drains, so the garden flooded back into the penthouse, down the lift shaft, and into the restaurant I worked. Chaos. 2 years later, I'm working in a different hotel. Same city. The restaurant had a fountain in it. I come in to open up one morning, and the restaurant is flooded. Gardener has turned on the fountain tap to refill and forgot to turn it off. It was the same gardener. Story 53. One of my coworkers in a marina was relatively new. He didn't ask if the guy's boat took gas or diesel, and he just handed him the diesel hose. I noticed around 250 gallons in that it was a boat I knew took gas. The boat owner was cool about it. He paid for the diesel, the fuel pump out, the gas, and even tipped the guy. Could have been a big disaster, though. Story 54. A 911 fire dispatcher falling asleep on midnight shift, not seeing the heart attack call on his computer screen for almost 15 minutes. He was awakened by the call taker after receiving a second telephone call asking why no one had arrived. The victim was an inmate at the prison and passed before ambulance finally arrived. Story 55. We were working in the lab installing some equipment, and my coworker went up on a ladder and bumped his shoulder on a pipe with a quick disconnect sticking out of the ceiling. And in a fit of rage, he grabbed his pipe cutter and cut the pipe. It was live and a direct feed to the building's argon supply and emptied almost the entire tank. The whole building had to be evacuated. Story 56. A few years ago, I was working at a tech sales company, and this guy started at my company for only a couple of weeks. His dumbass, we are in Austin, had a pound of substances delivered from Colorado to our office. We were all sitting there working, and all of a sudden all these cop cars come racing into the company parking lot. We were all, what the heck did someone do? Minutes later, he was being led out in handcuffs while we all watched and laughed. Like I said, he had only been there 2 weeks, so we really didn't know him, so we didn't give a crap. We told his story to every new person that started from that day on. Hey, don't have substances delivered to the office, okay? Story 57. Had a coworker send a multi-million-dollar transfer at the wrong time, Forex differential, ended up costing $500,000 more. He was fired within a week. The worst thing is that he had just graduated college and shouldn't have been in such high position. Higher up, executive was his friend and promoted him 4 times within a year. Ruined his entire career. He works as a salesman, last I heard. Story 58. I work in a hospital. One of my colleagues was removing a past patient from a ward. We used these big trolleys with a bright blue cover. He'd had a long day and forgot to actually take the patient to the mortuary on site and ended up putting the trolley back in the cupboard. Next person in that cupboard got a bit of a surprise. Story 59. I'm a heavy equipment operator, and a couple weeks ago, another operator on my job lowered the boom on an excavator at the wrong time and lost a 22-year-old guy's thumb. Story 60. Not an employee, but a customer. Me and my coworker had a huge fridge we had to get into a little doorway. Even with the door taken off the hinges, we could not fit it inside. We told the homeowner we can leave it in the garage and come back when he gets the frame taken off. About a week later, we were back to move his fridge into the home. We finally got it past the doorway, but it didn't fit between his counter and the wall. The guy had marble countertop, and we didn't want to damage the fridge. So we tried to lift it up, laying sideways to get it over. Still not enough room because of a beam of the ceiling the fridge wouldn't fit. So we told the customer the fridge was too big. We can return it so he could get a smaller fridge. The guy was furious that we couldn't get it in, so he started to huff and puff about how stupid we were that we were unable to get the fridge over. Once he started that, I told him we were done, and not going to take the abuse, so we put the fridge down and left. No doors on it or anything. The guy was cussing up a storm as he left, saying he'll do it himself, no problem. The next day, we were called back out to the same house to pick the fridge up. I told my manager I was uncomfortable going there, but we were the only ones in the area and needed to get it done, so we went. Guy's wife and son answered the door and let us in. The guy was nowhere in sight. Me and my partner went into the kitchen, living room area to collect the fridge, and saw that dude completely destroyed his countertop and ceiling trying to move it in. The son said they tried to lift it over as we had tried, but the dad tried to force it to fit. Fridge was out of the return window too, so the guy only was refunded the money he paid to have the fridge delivered and installed. We were only there to take the fridge away as he insisted on it. Word of advice. If you're going to get a new fridge, measure, measure, and measure again. Story 61. I'm a tattoo artist and I have 2 stories. So these 2 things weren't like duck-ups that had a massive impact on a lot of people, but something that required immediate removals and getting fired from their jobs. We had a new apprentice, maybe on the job less than 2 weeks. We already took the time and showed him everything related to his daily, weekly work, so he was familiar with the job duties. First time he attempted to clean the metal tubes and piercing equipment that we kept in the clean room before going in the autoclave, he didn't wear gloves. He got like 2 tubes cleaned of excess ink before I caught him, and I explained that whenever he deals with any equipment, he needs to wear gloves because there is a duckton of crap that can go south. Instead of just admitting his mistake, he grabs the metal brush he was using, starts rubbing it on his hand hard as duck, and says, "Dude, that crap is so rare. I don't know why you'd even worry about it." I stared at him blankly for about 10 seconds and told him to grab all his crap and get out and don't bother coming back. Second one, had a street tattoo artist coming in to do an apprenticeship. We were going to let him still work with his clients he already had under our supervision, but not work on people coming into the shop, walk-ins as they are called. And he would still be in charge of cleaning and normal apprenticeship crap, even though he was going to still work a couple tattoos a month. Within the first month, I showed him how to make his own shading ink and keep it stored properly, so he didn't have to keep mixing his color for every cap of shading ink he needed to pour. Yeah, well, I walked into the shop early the next day for an appointment and found him standing over the sink we cleaned the metal tubes in, the one from the above post, using the metal tube scrubber to clean out excess ink from an old plastic bottle of red ink. I said, "What the heck are you doing? That's unsanitary. You need to throw that plastic bottle now." And once again, instead of just admitting the mistake, literally turned to me straight-faced and said, "What the customer don't know won't hurt them," to which I responded, "No, that's the exact type of crap that will not only hurt them, but potentially kill them," and promptly told him to grab his crap, get out, and don't come back. Story 62. I worked for a grave digging service for around a year, glamorous I know, and one day on the job, we had one of those married couple graves where they share the same headstone and are buried side by side. This dude was the latter. His spouse had passed before him. And while my coworker was digging out his plot with an excavator, he accidentally broke into this man's wife's casket. One of the most horrifying things I've ever seen. And now you get to picture it too. Have a nice day. Story 63. So a friend of mine works in telecoms. When he was a young engineer, he accidentally knocked out FM radio in several London boroughs. To be clear, this is quite a feat. There are like 4 layers of redundancy before it bumps to MP3 songs, which it did, only for 5 minutes or so, but boy. Story 64? Wasn't even on the job, but was out to dinner. It was a local new restaurant, so the Nair looked basically directly into the kitchen, and they hadn't put up decorations or all the doors yet. So it was really easy to see and hear what was happening in the kitchen from my seat at the bar. It wasn't super busy, but it looked like they hadn't fully staffed yet, so people were running around doing multiple jobs. There was one guy who just would not move fast, and you could see the kitchen manager getting more and more annoyed. The slow dude brought back a load from a bus table and then went about clearing one of the prep stations in the kitchen. He stacked up the knives and some other stuff and put it all in a big sink, full of dirty, opaque water. Multiple large knives point up in a big ass sink, full of dirty water. A kitchen where everyone is moving fast. Kitchen manager canned him on the spot. Story 65. My first day at my first job. I worked at a small pet shop. My family had been friends with the owner for years, and I had been asking for a job there since I was 10. I knew a ton about animals, but was very nervous the first day. My manager, who was supposed to train me, had chipped her tooth a half hour before I showed up for my shift. So it was just me with one other employee and the owner who was tending animals in the back. I was asked to go do water changes, so I went and changed the water for every tank in the store, all by myself. And I forgot to add dechlorinate to the water. We realized this when suddenly all the betta fish started turning over dead like 10 minutes later. I hit probably 50 fish. The other girl working cussed when she realized what happened. Told me to go away and ran with the bottle of Prime to dump a bunch into each tank as fast as she could. I ran to the feeder rat room and sat there crying for like an hour before the owner came and found me. He saw how upset I was and was wonderful, saying that it was an honest mistake and very obviously I would never forget it again. I was still so upset that I tried to quit, but he stopped me and said to try again. He never even docked my pay for the several hundreds of dollars worth of fish I hit. I ended up working there all the way until I moved away for college a few years later. Never hit anything else, thankfully, and worked my butt off to be the best employee and animal caretaker I could be, but will always feel immense guilt when I remember. Story 66. Tried to disassemble a large CNC lathe while it was still powered up. Came very close to copping an oil injection injury because the hydraulics were live. Another time put the key into a manual chuck on the same old, think 80s punch card CNC old, lathe thinking it was the end of the program. It wasn't. Luckily, the next step in the program required the lathe to spin up to 2,500 revolutions per minute. In reverse, so when the key invariably came flying out of the chuck, it smashed into the guard on the back of the machine rather than through his chest. Both cases, it was me. I'm really lucky to be alive. Story 67. We had an old electrical engineer in my department. Really knew his stuff. Except he was nearly useless on a computer. He didn't want everyone to know, so he skated by and had other people pick up the slack for him. Though a series of blunders and lack of documentation on his part, he caused an electrical control box to be removed from the list of parts that we were supplying to the customer for that program. That was worth $12 million for revenue in the first 6 years once the product went into production. Story 68. 2009, I was on my last deployment in Iraq, Air Wing. A maintenance person ran a forklift into a plane's wing pod and just left it and didn't tell anyone. There was this big random formation, and as my crew walked into the hangar, we were like, oh, I bet that's why we're here. JAG got involved. Story 69. You know when you drop something and try to catch it with your foot? Well, I was working in a kitchen and this guy dropped his chef knife and damn kicked it at me. Story 70. Higher education. Someone messed up an update to the student information system for the entire system. 3 universities and about 15 colleges. Didn't notice it until that evening. Had to roll back the update. They also rolled the database back by about 16 hours during the enrollment period. All the information that was put in during that 16 hours was lost. Story 71 was a 911 operator. I quit when I realized the job wasn't for me, because it's not a job you can half-ass. Anyway, we had a new guy who didn't take the job seriously at all. One time somebody called and said they were paranoid that people were listening to their phone calls and their thoughts. This guy was calling from a neighboring city, so new guy had to transfer him to an operator at the neighboring city. Once the call is connected, you have to hang up since it's no longer your call. But new guy thought, this call's too interesting, and decided to mute himself and listen on the line. The operator is assuring the caller that nobody's listening to his calls and thoughts. And at this point, new guy goes, this is boring, and hangs up, which makes a loud audible click. Now the caller is going into a paranoid meltdown because somebody actually was listening to his calls. Story 72. I used to work in a daycare. We had a 3-step cleaning routine. 1 spray was a soap and water mix, 2 was just water, and 3 was a disinfectant spray. I worked with a girl in the 1-year-old room, and some people in there would spray the babies with the water because they liked it, and it would distract them during transition times when we were getting them ready for a stroller ride, and we had permission from our director to do so. Well, this girl ended up spraying them all with 3, the disinfectant spray instead of the water. Story 73. Watched an HP repair rep delete about 50 terabytes of company data by not listening. Story. HP comes out to replace a hard drive that is on the fritz. This hard drive is one of many. All of these hard drives are bundled together in what is called a RAID array. This combines the drives into one massive drive for data storage. The array has redundancy, so it can afford to lose a drive or 2. If too many drives die, the redundancy is gone and your data is lost, corrupted. HP guy comes in, calls us. Okay, pull drive 14. Should be blinking yellow and the rest should have a green light. HP guy pulls wrong drive us. Okay, we saw drive 9 go offline. Put that back. We need to wait for the RAID to rebuild. If you pull the wrong one again, the RAID will fail. HP guy does not wait and pulls another drive us. The whole RAID went offline. Did you see what happened? HP guys leaves both drives on the front desk and leaves. Turns out the lights on the device were not on. Easy fix. There is a setting in the device to turn them off or on. Rather than telling us he didn't know which drive was which, he just pulled at random and ruined the entire company's data. We had to restore from many old backups. Story 74. Machining. Had a coworker once who scrapped a large stainless steel part on a lathe. Instead of telling the boss, they decide to bore out the center, replace it with a plug of the exact same size that they press fit in, then machine over it so it appears as one seamless piece. Passes through inspection, sent to the customer. Customer vacuum bakes it and the center plug falls through. Had that not happened, the part would have essentially and quite literally blown up the customer's equipment once it got to a certain stage. Government work. So there's years and millions of dollars invested into this customer's project. Our shop would have had to close down permanently if the mistake wasn't caught when it was. Coworker was fired immediately. Story 75. On my last day of my high school Walmart job, I was showing the new guy how to move pallets of milk into the cooler. There were maybe 6 in total. I went to grab the last one, and when I got back into the cooler, the new guy had somehow bumped the pallets with the one he was bringing in and knocked all of them over. Milk all over the floor, all that product gone. I immediately left and never looked back. Story 76. A caregiver at a daycare left a 2-year-old on the playground. She miscounted and missed him because he was hiding. She discovered it the minute they got back in the room. He was fine. She got fired. Some details you just can't miss. Ever. Story 77. When I was a shift manager at a restaurant, one of the waitresses forgot to put a decimal point on the POS system, so someone was charged $3,000 for a $30 takeout order. The guy didn't notice at first either and paid with a credit card. Luckily, he thought it was hilarious. Story 78. Used to work in a fish factory in southwest Scotland. Believe it or not, but Calvin Harris used to work there pre-fame. But the story is not about him. It's about a poor lad that used to help the production line by filling the sauce hopper. Think empty plastic pots being placed on a conveyor belt. 8 prawns placed in the pot. Some veg on top. Blob of prawn Mary Rose sauce. then a guy with a sealer machine that would heat seal a film lid on. We would do a few thousand of these per shift, so would batter through the ingredients. On this fateful day, our protagonist retrieved a large vat of sauce from the cold store, about 500 liters or so. The vat looked a bit like a massive stainless steel cauldron on casters and needed to be wheeled down a small ramp. Unfortunately, in his defense, it was a bit of a freak accident. One of the wheels caught the edge of a safety barrier on the ramp, and the whole lot went over in slow motion. Cue a tsunami of sauce that enveloped all in its path. 2 of us got knocked over, and 10 of us had to change our welly boots as the sauce had gone over the top. I'll never forget the look on his face when it happened. Kind of a, did anyone see that? Don't think so. Story 79. A colleague of mine made a small error of window properties for a construction project. It was just a single letter that was from, resulting in the windows having the wrong classification for sound protection. We found out when they were already installed. Since this is Germany, they had to be replaced. 50,000 euro out of the window. The manufacturer was fine. He just did, was he was asked to, and we had to carry the damage. That's about what he would have earned that year. Story 80. A United States Postal Service employee of 5 years here. I've seen it happen twice now in my local office. 2 newer carriers have been caught throwing away mail. The punishment for that is jail time or fines. They teach you in orientation on day 1 the severity of obstruction of mail. Wouldn't understand why someone would do that. If you're having that bad of a day, just call off or quit. The post office has its own division of police that's job is solely to investigate manners like this and catch people. Story 81. 1. In the 80s, I was working at the post office sorting mail. The guy next to me was sorting driving test appointment cards, which back then were pre-printed and had the date and time of the appointment written in black biro. I turn around and he's altering the dates with his pen. 2. Similar to above, but we're sorting postcards from a local holiday park. Guy next to me is reading the cards. He finds 2 cards from the same girl. The first card to her boyfriend is all, "I love you, miss you, mom and dad, don't let me go out late." The second card is to her friend saying how late she's allowed out and that she'd met a boy and was going to screw him. Both cards were stapled together and sent to the boyfriend. Story 82. I'm a healthy human subject for medical research studies. I did a study with special dietary restriction groups of 0 carbs, no carbs, and a regular diet. I was in the 0 carb group, and our breakfast consisted of a large stack of Canadian bacon and a drink. I read on the side of the can that it had 18 grams of carbs. I mentioned this to the doctor in charge, and he said, well, it's hard to get 0 carbs. I thought to myself, in a drink? No, it's not. 3 days later, they realized that I was right and they had to stop our study and send us home. The doctor had been in charge of the clinic, but I noticed he was no longer in charge when I was invited back to the next cohort of the same study. So, instead of earning $7,000, I earned $4,000 initially and $7,000 for a total of $11,000. So his mistake earned me more money. Story 83. I used to work at the front desk of a hotel. My supervisor made me make keys for 2 guests that were locked out. I didn't want to do it because the credit card on file declined, but he said I needed to do it. I did. I made 2 new keys, 1 for each room. I knew I should have not done it. They left the hotel in the morning without paying, and he dared blame me. The chicks left the room dirty all over. I was ready to be fired because I hated that job so much. Story 84. When I worked at Dollar General in 2018, I was 19 at the time, and to preface, I was a lead sale associate and key holder, lowest level of management, just below assistant manager. During training, there were multiple videos going over the risks of phone scams and stickers on each register, store phone, etc. That said, beware phone scams. Fast forward a couple months, my assistant manager, a 40-something wire-old woman, was on a long phone call that she said was serious and related to the store and was kind of hiding in the office. She had directed me to take over the register while she handled it. While checking out a customer, I saw her come out, scan a Visa gift card, load it for $500, and process the transaction as if it was paid for in cash for the person on the phone. Immediately after I finished with the customer, she was back in the office and had already provided the person on the other line with all the card information, and they were giving her some BS confirmation number and telling her that someone from DG would be by with cash later. I immediately told her she was being scammed and to hang up and went out to the register to void the last transaction for her. She somehow had no idea that it was a scam and no idea how to void a transaction. Saved my small town Dodge $500 though, so that's cool, I guess. Story 85. At Marine combat training, we had a range where we were shooting a belt-fed machine gun because the barrel gets so hot it has to be replaced every so often. It has a fairly easy mechanism where you unscrew it by turning a handle. However, one of my friends accidentally grabbed the hot barrel with his bare hand. Story 86. Spent a summer during college driving a truck for a soda company. One of the guys who also got hired not long after proceeded to run one side of the trailer against the corner of a building, and then, as he tried to back up, he ran the other side against a telephone pole. He drove back to the base, got the key to the safe, and took whatever money was in it, and left. Have no idea what happened to him, but the trailer was destroyed. Story 87. They asked, manager of Albertsons, insisted we, beverage distributors, use these crafty rotten pallets for our product and the good ones be used for his store's merchandise. Hint, it's all your store's merch. You already paid for it. We just come by and stock it for you. We told him over and over our pallets, which get loaded on bay levels 2 and 3, so up in the air on the shelves, needed heavy-duty pallets. One day we come in and he has all our crap lowered down to the floor and stacked on these flimsy pieces of crap. We start unloading it back onto the blue pallets, and he comes in and throws a fit. So we stock what could go out, and then my coworker takes a forklift and starts to raise the crafty pallet up to the 3rd bay where it goes. Pallet snaps in half, and about 50 cases of wine is now on his stockroom floor, flooding out onto the sales floor. Working in retail and service is the worst. It's not just customers, it's the whole system. Everyone all along they way is so petty and stupid about everything. Story 88. I'm a nurse, used to work on a med-surg unit. Someone connected a CPAP machine to the air socket in the wall instead of the oxygen one. Patient was without oxygen most of the night, with a peripheral saturation of 54% when I discovered it at the start of my shift. Man, did we do a lot of root cause analysis on that one. Story 89. Worked in dog rescue. Vet prescribed an injection for a pup. Coworker gave it orally for no known reason. She shouldn't have even been touching the meds, and certainly not administering them without checking the notes. Luckily, there were no ill effects other than needing a new injection. Still makes my blood run cold at what could have happened. Story 90. Didn't personally see it, but my Mills doctor, family doctor, general practitioner, forgot the facts with her lung scan report. Next time she was there, about 6 months after the scan, she asked, "By the way, what did that report say?" "What report? From my scan?" Searches in a huge stack of unsorted papers on an untidy desk. "Oh, well, she had cancer and nearly passed because her treatment started 6 months late." Story 91. I work for a large American auto manufacturer. We produce approximately 500 vehicles per shift, or 1,000 new cars a day. Every car has a VIN, and every matching part matches that VIN. Docker pads, dashboard, seats, etc. That way, everything lines up correctly in assembly. One day I came in, and there were new cars parked everywhere. Up by the turnstile, in the grass, down the aisles, everywhere. It turned out a new guy wasn't checking the VINs. By the time they caught it, 460 cars had already been produced, with the wrong seats. He skipped one in the rack by accident, and so every seat afterwards was wrong, off by one. Every car now had the wrong seat colors. 3 red seats, 1 black, or 3 tan seats and 1 white. They shut the factory down for a week so the mechanics could catch up. The guy who did it got fired. Even the union couldn't keep his job. Story 92. I'm an electronic engineer, and early in my career was carrying a new Hewlett-Packard Spectrum Analyzer, a heavy, very expensive piece of test equipment that our department had just purchased. It had an adjustable carrying handle. I realized that the angle of the handle wasn't comfortable, so tried to adjust it while holding it in midair. This adjustment is done by pulling out the sides of the handle, where it joins the case, unlocking the handle mechanism, and allowing it to rotate. What I didn't realize that, when set to a certain angle, the unlocked handle detaches completely from the body. I was left holding the handle while the Spectrum Analyzer smashed to the floor. Oops. We persuaded HP to replace it under warranty on the grounds that the handle mechanism was clearly faulty. We were a huge government department, so had a lot of influence. Story 93. Worked in foreign currency. Staff member was showing newbie that, especially for large volumes of cash, you should count it twice to make sure you've counted correctly. Customer came in with $10,000 just as it was time to demonstrate this. Staff member counted out $10,000, then started the double count. Except in their head, they forgot to reset the count back to $0. So the $10,000 was counted as $20,000 and exchanged. Customer understandably didn't come back. And if a business hands you a product and tells you it's yours, the cops don't give a crap. So that's a nice payday for the customer. Story 94. Here I am thinking what I did last week was bad, and people out here telling stories significantly worse. Makes me feel less like an idiot, but still. I forgot to submit a 200 case order for an account plus a holiday display. Got a vendor violation for it. Came in Monday to write my order for today. And surprisingly, we didn't run out of product, and we decided to push the display back to next week as they were waxing the floors this week. Story 95. Worked in a machine shop for a while, and for about a week, we were putting the finishing touches on some impeller blades, which I was informed cost something like $1,000 each. So we were being very careful when handling them, and had the finished pieces loaded into a crate that was sitting up on blocks for forklift clearance, towards the end of the job. An old man who came in once or twice a week as a delivery driver climbed into the forklift and promptly knocked one of the blocks out from under the crate, sending 50 plus of these things crashing all over the concrete floor. I was just glad it wasn't me. XD. Story 96. Young guy on the job once stuck a length of wood through the legs of a ladder so he could cut it down to size. Then proceeds to put the other end of the wood up on his thigh and sawzall it right there. I had to stop him before he started doing surgery on himself. Story 97. Dad worked at a nice 4-star restaurant in Tahoe. The staff would regularly go water ski before shifts and had occasional hard wipeouts which fill orifices with water if you crash just right. As he was leaning over to serve someone, his entire sinus decided it was the right time to drain onto the customer's plate. Yeah, they didn't stick around for dessert. Story 98. Older lady activated many gift cards and then gave the information to someone over the phone. They said they needed to test our system. Ye lost about $500 and she got fired. Story 99. One guy, let's call him Bob, took a liking to theft. Bob would order parts and tools from our storeroom and take those items home instead. Bob was caught when he attempted to steal a miter saw. He had a stack of boxes, flattened, and duct taped together to take home. This is allowed as long as security is informed. What is not allowed is hollowing out a space. In the center of said boxes, and placing a very expensive miter saw inside, he had it placed up front ready for when he clocked out. Security just so happened to need to move the boxes and notice the weight difference. Management was informed and they waited outside for him to walk out with his boxes after he clocked out, fired him and pressed charges. Story 100. You know those cardboard balers that you place used cardboard into, and the machine compresses the material, and then you wrap 3 large wires around the bale. Some guys I worked with in a grocery store knew that the compression arm doesn't actually go down all the way. So they physically grabbed a rookie and tossed him into the empty baler, closed it, and pressed start. Of course, the poor kid completely crapped himself, thinking he was about to get flattened. The machine stopped with enough room that it didn't hurt the kid, but those dudes were summarily dismissed. Story 101. At my previous job, we had a new associate fall for an email scam on his first day. In case anyone's wondering if those emails that kind of look like they're from your boss, and ask if you can do them a favor that turns out to be buying them a gift card work. I know of it working at least once, which is why they keep doing it. Story 102. Someone was meant to terminate 2 employees and remove their access to everything. They accidentally terminated all employees, including all management and the CEO, and nearly everyone was locked out of everything for more than half a day. 2 people out of an organization of thousands of employees could log into systems, but that's it. These 2 people who had access had to manually re-employ everyone who was locked out too. Considering that the organization offers emergency services, it was a pretty big F-up. Story 103. A co-worker, both porters, and our resident detailer spent the entire afternoon making an exotic car look absolutely pristine for a customer, only for the salesman who was overseeing the sale, and was rushing us the entire time to hurry up, to slam it into a light pole in our new inventory lot, which was basically damn empty at the time, bringing the car from the detail shop in the back to the customer out front. The sale was not completed, suffice to say. Story 104. I worked in a substances lab, and I watched someone drop a jar of substances oil worth $30,000 on the floor. She just walked out and didn't come back after. Story 105. Major hotel in a major tourist city. Christmas Eve, 2001. Christmas Day is booked out in the restaurant and the function room. Overnight room service chef was supposed to mop out the cool rooms. When doing the biggest, he got cold from the fans blasting, so he turned them off. Order came in. He forgot to turn it back on. Head chef covers an 8 a.m. Christmas Day to find the main fridge. Full to the brim with prep, turned off and above safe temp. All prep in the bin, and the mad scramble to save Christmas lunch for 300 plus people begins. It was not a good day for overnight chef. What is the dumbest mistake you've made at work? Was giving a presentation to 300 people and rested my arm on top of the podium in a spot where there was a button that turned the entire system off, taking 10 minutes to reboot and get my presentation back up. 2 minutes into talking again, I did it again. Story 2. This one makes me laugh when I think about it. I was 16 pushing grocery carts outside a grocery store. Lot attendant was my title, and my job was to make sure chaos didn't break out in the parking lot. But I also had some other duties, like taking out trash, emptying ashtrays, and doing a few other little odd jobs around the store. One day, a woman taps me on the shoulder in the store and says, "I'm sorry, but my kid just threw up over that display." She points at this display of Entenmann's snack cake that was freestanding in between some aisles, and I can see that this toddler had clearly projectile vomited all over it. There was some on most of the boxes, and I think, I'll handle this. So I scoop up all the boxes, take them out to the dumpster, and throw them all away. And as I'm dusting my hands off and congratulating myself on being so helpful, a manager was like, "What did you just do?" And I said, "I cleaned up a big mess. A kid threw up on everything." And he said, "Yeah, but you can't just throw a whole display away. There's a process." Inventory. We have to report these losses. I said, "I push shopping carts, man. I don't know anything about any of that." And he let out a long sigh and said, "This isn't going to be fun for either of us." Then he lowered me by my ankles back into the dumpster, and I had to fish out all the snack cake boxes covered in child vomit and then learn how to scan them through some kind of computer. And in case you're wondering, I haven't eaten an Entenmann's snack cake since. Story 3. Was on vacation and my boss told me to push a script another employee wrote before he quit. I was at Disneyland and didn't bother looking at it and just pushed it. Needless to say, the former employee locked all our computers, 25000 of them. They tried to pin it on me, but in the end, my boss got in trouble for forcing me to work while I was on vacation and without any time to prepare. Story 4. I'm an assistant. My second week on the job, I took my boss's $2,000 personal computer to get repaired. When I was bringing it back to his house, I dropped it and cracked the screen. It was a small crack, and my boss is the chilliest person on the planet. I genuinely thought I was going to get fired, but instead he just happily started using it again and said it was no big deal since it still worked. Story 5. I needed to cut a 2-inch rubber hose. There wasn't a table nearby, so I put the hose on my knee and pushed the box cutter through the hose, directly into my knee. Sometimes the brain just doesn't work. Story 6. Large printer. One of those office units. Well, it had a manual switch to go between 220 and 110 voltage. Halfway around the world, and coworker forgot to change the switch to the correct voltage and fried the power supply. It's going to take a week to get a replacement unit, but my coworker needs to depart to go to his wedding. So a week later, I fly out to finish this guy's job and install the new unit. I forget to check the voltage and fry it again. Oops. A lady at work replied to a promotion notice with, "This idiot don't work at all, just takes credit for our work." Sent it as reply all. Story 7. Not me, but a middle-aged female in another department was unmuted while taking a massive dump and loudly taking a personal call on her cell. All 265 people on the call could hear her answer the phone and start talking about whatever while hearing the distinct sound of pee followed by farts and plops. Despite the CEO and the group directors all calmly at first, telling her to please mute before the panic started to set in. She thought she was muted the entire time and had the volume set so low she couldn't hear people yelling at her, so she could instead be on her own call. It was almost 5 minutes into the call when we could hear the toilet paper rolling in the dispenser that she went dead quiet and left the meeting a second later. This was also not a work-from-home position either. Story 8. I accidentally deleted the entire project directory for my company, thinking I was deleting a folder called Proposals. We lost about half of the directory before I was able to cancel the deletion. The data was gone as the folder was too big to fit in the trash can, so it was permanently deleting files as it went along. Story 9. Taken a new medicine at work, then made me act like I was drunk as duck. It was so embarrassing and stupid. I should have tried the new medicine at home first. Story 10. Brand new manager trainee. Had to sit through death by 90s OSHA videos. All stuff I'd seen before, and I was incredibly bored of it. At the end of the video, there was a random guy in our office. I assumed was a customer, and I sarcastically said, "Well, that was an hour I'll never get back." He goes, "Did you not enjoy it?" I said, "Yeah, I didn't at all, but I get it. Safety comes first, so it's necessary, but the videos are so common sense it hurts. Anyway, can I help you real quick? I have a meeting to get to. Big guy from corporate merchandising team several states away is going to be here in an hour or two." He goes, "I'm filling in for big guy from corporate. I'm the North American safety director. Let's have a chat about your vision of safety at our workplace since you have that all figured out." Story 11. Threw some dead scooter batteries in the dumpster. Next day, the trash company rep came in and said a garbage truck went up in flames and asked if we threw any batteries away. I said no. Story 12. I was a tank crewman in the Army. Gunner. After we finished one of our gunnery tables, which you can think of as training exercises where you drive around and shoot targets, then get graded on everything from time to accuracy to proper fire commands, we reported in for grading. One particular engagement I was feeling real confident about. Our commands were on point. We were quick, and my aim was spot on. It contained a moving target, which was a plywood cutout of a truck that moves on rails and is heated from behind so that we can pick it up on thermal sights. Anyway, our grading went something like, "Well, your time was good, fire commands were perfect, and your aim was dead on. But unfortunately, we're going to have to give you 0 points for this engagement because your target was actually over here on this hillside. What you hit was a badger." In the recording from the tower's camera, it was very obviously a poor badger just minding his own business, waddling along the hillside that I annihilated with a 120mm Sabo round. I felt terrible. Damn of a shot, though. Story 13. Forgot to turn the sign to open. Coworker found out after he came out, asked why the place was empty, and watched 5 people come to the door, stop, turn, and walk away. I was hungover and stood at the counter like a zombie for an hour and a half, having watched many people walk up and away. Coworkers greeted me until I resigned with, "Are we open?" Story 14. Ate a cookie a customer gave me. Oh no, those were for later. Yeah, I could tell by the aftertaste. Thanks though, I'll just go spend the rest of the day on maintenance tasks away from customers. Luckily, I'm the boss, so I just put on my headphones and started fixing crap around the shop. I let my main manager know the duck up, and he kind of just didn't send anyone my way for the rest of the day. Definitely got razzed for that one every time I brought in baked goods for the team for years, though. Story 15. Well, many years ago, while in my early days of military life, I was in charge of ordering supplies for my division. I was trying to order D batteries for mag lights. I wanted to order about 38 cases, which was 380 batteries. I misread how they came. I thought it was ordered by each, so I ordered 380 batteries. That was the first mistake. For the second mistake, I actually fat-fingered it and ordered 3,800. To compound the error, the unit of issue was by the case. I ended up with 3,800 cases of D batteries while at sea on an aircraft carrier. It sucked so bad. Story 16. Getting a friend hired. I worked for a restaurant for many months, and it was great. Never heard a complaint. One day, they decided they wanted more help. Offered my friend the job. In less than 6 months, trouble was happening everywhere. I'll never work with a friend. Story 17. I renamed all customers' last names to the same last name. I don't remember why I was doing an update, but forgot to include the where clause. Thankfully, I had a way to restore them, but that sucked. Story 18. Work in payroll, so have $10,000 mistakes aren't uncommon. Was testing out a new warning, deduction code on a new account, and it entered $5,000 as a test check and forgot to delete it before processing. To a terminated employee who promptly emptied his bank account so we couldn't pull it back much worse, a coworker rerouted something like 20 direct deposits to her own account. It's all super traceable with username, timestamp records of every single change, so she was promptly fired and I believe arrested. Story 19. We were in an all-hands meeting over Zoom. Small company, 90 employees, had just hired 6 new people, mostly remote. CEO ended the meeting by opening it up to questions. I wanted to sound welcoming to the new employees, but I didn't want to turn on my mic, so I typed in the chat, "Where are all the new employees located?" Immediately hit send. Except I didn't type new. I accidentally hit J on the keyboard instead of N, and I didn't proofread before sending. So I asked the entire company where the Jew employees are located. Immediately followed up with new, "I'm so sorry," and my CEO played it in stride like a pro. Story 20. My second week at my current job, I backed into and knocked over a light pole. Worst part, it was on video. Story 21. Was filling a paint drum and left to use the bathroom, then proceeded to go on break and midway through a snack realized and ran all the way back to paint everywhere. Story 22. Long ago, was in it and was moving data volumes on and offline. Misread an 8 for a 0 and took the airline's reservation system down for 30 minutes. At 2 million per hour, oops. Immediately reported what I did. It was fixed. Mr. said, "You know what you did and I know it won't ever happen again." Yep. Sorry, okay. Carry on. I went on to a long career in it, clearly never forgetting that lesson and response. Story 23. It was not really an error, but I worked at a Midwest bank, and the lady that normally pays off the bank's borrowed money when the bonds mature had to be at a conference in North Carolina for a week. So she left me instructions to pay off a $103 million loan that was going to come due while she was gone. She left me a deposit, withdrawal slip from the bank's own account, and the wiring instructions. I was to fill the slip out, and at exactly 3 p.m. go to the 5th floor wire room and ask for so-and-so lady and hand her the slip and the wiring instructions to the DTC in New York. Well, the withdrawal slip did not have enough amount boxes for that much money. You could only go up to $99,999,999.99. So I had to get another one and break it up into 2 sums, one for $50 million and one for $53 million. Well, that lady in the wire office didn't know who I was, and for all she knew, I was a crooked employee wiring $103 million of the bank's money to my own offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. And the thing was that it is such a large amount of money that the interest on it was more than my day's wages just dealing with her for an hour. Finally, I had to go back up to corporate trust and get a bank VP to countersign it, or she was not sending the wire. Had she not, the bank would have missed its repayment and their credit rating lowered. Not to mention the bank's shares falling because of a missed payment. None of those damn VPS would countersign because they didn't know or trust me either. They thought I well could be stealing from the bank and refused. I had to go to the bank president and explain the situation, and he was clearly not happy. But he called the wire office and said they were to accept my slips and send them as soon as they got them before the goddamn DTC closed. Because if they didn't, I would have to fly to New York and be in the DTC when they opened with the money. I hated that job, but that is my fun story of the time I had to write a check for $103 million. Story 24. Forwarded an email to a coworker, which included a link to a viral video that everyone in the world was talking about that month. A very naughty video. But I forgot to use my personal email instead of my work email. Boss intercepted the message. I was fired the next morning. This was a week before Christmas. In the grand scheme, it all worked out for the best. I ended up at a much better job making twice as much money, but I still feel dumb about it. Story 25. Why filter for laser chiller $100? Me find same filter on McMaster car for $50. Me save lab $50 every 6 months. Except the McMaster one, while having the same filter specs, also contained cellulose. I caused some $15,000 pump diodes to die about $10,000 hours prematurely. Of course, we only figured out the issue when the second set of diodes died prematurely as well. Story 26. I threw away about $25,000 of old scrap parts. When we perform a warranty repair, the manufacturer requires us to hold on to the removed, failed parts for so many days in case they request for them. They do this to inspect them to discover how the failure occurred, but I suspect it is only to make sure we actually did the repair. Years ago when I first started, the guy training me did not like the job. He wanted to go back to sitting on the parts counter rather than working the warehouse, so he did the bare minimum in training. One task I had was that each week, I would take a list of all the repairs that the manufacturer reimbursed us for and look for repair order numbers with parts costs on them. I was then supposed to make note of the repair order numbers and find the parts tagged by the row and throw them away. Easy job, right? What was never explained to me was that we have to wait minimum 30 days from the row appearing on this report before we can throw the parts away, because that's how long the manufacturer has to request the part back. The stapled lists of row numbers was sitting on my computer in the warehouse, and no one told me why I had to wait 30 days. So, being bored one day, I decided to be a proactive and good employee and scrap all the lists at once. Little did I know that a certain recall for replacing controls arms on one of the models was active, and the manufacturer was requesting every single part back. Oh, and if we cannot return the part, then the manufacturer will not reimburse us for the full repair. So the parts department had to pay back the service department the full repair. It was a little over $1,000 per repair. I must have thrown away 25 control arm kits. Surprisingly, I still kept my job. My manager took fault in not having me trained right. I'm grateful for that because a decade later, I have his job. And I make damn sure I explain the ABC all the way to the XYZ of why we do what we do, and the consequences of doing it wrong are not at all to my employees. Story 27. At 17, mistaking HR for a reasonable ear for my manager being a total asshat and bully. HR is not there to protect you. It's there to protect the company. Story 28. Worked in a mental hospital as a janitor. Been there for about a week when someone said I needed to clean a part I've never cleaned. It was a wing that had a security desk and a locked door. Halfway, though, mopping the floor, the Empire place locks down because one of the violent patients got out since I didn't know I had to lock the door, and the security guy was out to lunch. That ward was an isolation ward for violent people who were there on court order or sentenced there. Thankfully, the guy who got out just went to the day room and turned on the TV. When the nurses said he had to go back, he did. The janitor that did that ward was off sick, and I've never even been to that side of the hospital before. Wasn't told of any special rules or anything. Story 29. Not me per se, but an attorney at a large NY law firm where I was a paralegal knew I was taking a trip to Amsterdam. So I sent my out-of-office email to the litigation team, and he replied all with "pothead slacker." He was gone the next day. Poor guy. Story 30. I am personally responsible for a U.S. Navy warship losing all power and going completely dark in the middle of the night, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, for almost a half hour. Story 31. Not me. I worked at a gas station pumping gas. There were 2 of us, one for each island, and it was a slow day, so we were talking while one of the cars on his side was filling up. After a while, we noticed gas leaking from the bottom of the car. My partner shut it off quickly and to inform this elderly lady about a problem with her gas tank. The lady looked in her side mirror, then turned and quickly looked over her left shoulder, seeing the pump stinking out of filler. She then looked up and said, "You didn't, you a hole." Not knowing what was going on, her backed up, and she got out screaming at him while opening up her truck. There was 3 or 4 inches of gas poured directly into her trunk full of shopping bags. She berated him, called him an idiot for using the wrong tank while the real one was hidden under her license plate. He then calls her a git right as the owner comes over. Basically, the woman's deceased husband had some sort of auxiliary tank installed in the trunk at one time. The filler was on the driver's side with a shiny chrome cap that you couldn't miss. Coworker got scolded for the foul language. But the owner knew it was an honest mistake. No real discipline action, and the owner took care of the client. Story 32. I was working at a retail hardware store about 25 years ago. I had to do the cash deposit and drop it off at the bank night drop. Don't know how, but I forgot to go to the bank and went directly home instead. I didn't even think about it anymore. The cash bag with over $10,000 in cash and checks was waiting for me in the car the next morning. I didn't even lock my car doors. Story 33. First day on the job working for a cleaning company, the very first thing I did was pick a mop up from the bucket directly vertical, rather than at an angle, and shattered the overhead strip light above me while talking to the boss. Story 34. Quit a job where I had to do next to nothing, watched movies all day, but was paid the bare minimum to do a job where I'm constantly busy, but paid the bare minimum. Story 35. I was running chips in a casino. I had a cart of big chips that was set to a certain amount, and I was coloring tables up, taking small denominations and giving back $100 chips. The balance of my cart should never change. If I buy $5,000 worth of $25 chips, I give $5,000 worth of $100 chips. To one table, I took $500 more than I gave, putting my cart over by $500. I reported the mistake to my bosses so they could check cameras and see where the mistake happened. Between reporting that mistake and the next time I balanced my cart, I had organized my cart stupidly, and I buried big chips with small chips, which set my count off even further. The chips were there, but I was counting it wrong because of bad organizing. I had to report the second, non-existent mistake to my bosses. 10 minutes later, the surveillance supervisor comes to me to take the $500 and show me where the mistake was in my cart. Nothing here was major, but I felt like a complete damn git for days. Story 36. I was a support tech for a company that had a lot of outsourced employee in India. For some reason, probably sharing accounts, they never remembered their passwords. Instead of doing it right, someone wrote a wheel acrobat that called our DB2, old database, and updated a specific account with a known password. At some point, management wanted to know how often this was happening and who it was being used for. I took the time to add logging. I wanted to capture the entire update message in the log, but misused the pipe character, vertical bar. In DB2, the pipe adds words together, while in Shell, it logs to a file. I did this change on a Friday. We had someone call for their password to be reset to the known right as I was about to leave. I'd shut down my PC and was saying goodbye for the weekend when someone called me directly saying they couldn't log in. Basically, my script did an update without a where clause on a production DB on the password table. This means I reset every user login at the same time. The only good news was that it was to a known password. We had great audit tables, so I got it fixed, 64K updates later. But to this day, I fear having to manage any database where passwords are held. Story 37. I ordered 6 Esme water heaters in 3-phase configuration for a job. There was no 3-phase electrical anywhere on the job site. If you're not familiar with plumbing, Esme heaters are made to order non-returnable, and you can't convert them in the field to the correct electrical configuration. $9,000 a piece. Boss was not happy. I thought I was about to get fired. Luckily, we were able to make it up elsewhere further down the line. Story 38. I used to be a realtor. I listed a house, helped the sellers arrange staging, hired a professional photographer. Listing looked great. Lots of interest, multiple strong offers. Everything went unusually smoothly. Driving home from the closing, I was thinking how good it felt that the clients were so happy. So happy with the price they got, how smoothly it went. The photos, the staging. Damn, the staging. I'd forgotten to notify the stager that the house had sold. All the rented furniture was still in it. If the buyers wanted to be sticklers, they could keep it all. I immediately called the buyer's agent. But she didn't respond for hours, and I was crafting bricks. I called the stager and admitted to my giant screw-up. She pulled guys from other tasks and got the furniture out once I finally got a hold of the buyers. Ended up buying gifts for the stager, the buyers, and the buyer's agent. That day is one of the reasons I decided to no longer be a realtor. Story 39. Early in my career, I was out working on a 2-man truck fixing potholes. I was driving and my partner accidentally hit the radio mic, and we were broadcasting our entire conversation to the rest of the public works department. It ranged from talking about what a total a hole our boss was to discussing performing oral sex on one of the women that worked in the radio room. Those were the worst of the conversations. It went on for 2 hours until another crew spotted us and told us what had happened. Besides being embarrassed to show our faces in the bullpen at the end of the shift, the worst part was our supervisor's reaction. He came out to the bullpen before we went home and walked up, shaking his head. He took us off to the side away from the rest of the crew and told us to be sure to have our rain gear with us tomorrow. We were the designated flagging crew for the next 6 months. The only job I truly hated was flagging, and he knew it. The radio room operator was cool, though. She winked at us whenever she saw us in the building. For context, this was back in 1980. I learned from that incident. Story 40. My boss charged me with carefully depositing our cash earnings from the week at the bank down the road. I walked out to my car, set the bag on top of the car, and happily drove off. Story 41. Back in the day of floppy disks, The big boss was working for a week on a job for a presentation for a client, lots of spreadsheets, etc., on the day of the presentation. He gave the floppy and a blank to the new 18-year-old fresh out of a tech high school with high grades in data processing guy to make a backup. You would put the original in the drive, run the backup program, put the blank in the drive, it would go back and forth and copy the original to the blank if you didn't screw up the process. My immediate boss told me he had to go to bat for me big time to keep my job. Story 42. Let's see. Lost a kid as a ski instructor. That sucked. He was a little crap and hard to keep track of. Non-English speaker and didn't want to listen to my crafty Spanish. This was on a huge mountain also, Heavenly Valley. Luckily, a lefty nabbed him and handed off to a ski patroller. Then there's the cabinet shop I was working in a couple years ago. Trying to make a rabbit cut on Althea table saw, I was lining up my mark with the saw blade at the back of blade. Decided to turn the saw on and move my piece into the blade, from the back. That piece of wood left my hands like a bat out of hell. Table saws are insanely powerful, and I gave that thing a nice chunk of wood to throw at its absolute hardest, fastest speed. I put a hole in the metal garage door that faced the saw. I'm lucky I was standing to the side. First thing was not so stupid. The saw thing was definitely stupid AF. Story 43. First job was as a cart boy at a golf course. Pulled all the carts in for the night and forgot to plug them all in. Most were dead come morning on a Sunday. Fired on Monday. Story 44. A typo in a technical report turned 101.0 into 1010. The minimum standard was 100, so it passed with flying colors. Of course, given natural production variation, there were soon many, many expensive problems. Story 45. I accidentally took down a small network for a church. I was eating a donut and looking at a workstation screen trying to solve an issue. The staff at this site were weird about turning off monitors to save electricity. One of them said something about the monitor next to the one I was working on being on, so without looking, I reached over and hit the power button. The screen I was looking at stopped responding, and when I got up to check the server, I realized I had hit the power button on the server and not the monitor. Story 46. Working on an automatic failover in a Cisco ASA for our main outside interface, and accidentally set up a NAT loop that brought the whole org down for any external communication for 2 days, while we tried to find the needle in the haystack of ACLS that caused it. In my defense, it took 4 layers of TAC escalation and 6 Cisco engineers to stumble upon it. 150 employees just suddenly didn't have anything to do. No email, no internet, no connection to any cloud services. Nothing. My boss was like, "You ain't a cowboy if you ain't been bucked off." Or in other words, sometimes when you're working hard, stuff goes wrong. Learn from it, move forward. Story 47. Wrecked a battery-powered knockout punch for steel control panels, worth $3,000 CAD. In my defense, they asked me to come in on Saturday for overtime, and when I needed help, my supervisor. I was nowhere to be found, as per damn usual. I went for it and set it up wrong and jammed it up. The real mistake was not owning up to it right away. Next week, another guy tried to use it and realized it was broken, and I claimed ownership for the mistake. But I should have owned the mistake sooner and resolved the issue. We could have sent it away for service sooner. Mechanics in-house couldn't fix it. A lesson I learned when I was younger. Always own and report your mistakes as soon as possible, and if you can, try to have a solution in mind. I've got respect for folks who aren't afraid to own their mistakes, and I hope the bosses do too. Story 48. A 3-day sensor we make slipped from my hands, dropped on the floor. I felt so damn bad. We sell those for $100,000. Nothing broke. We just had to fix the laser and camera alignments. We have a tradition now. You drop a sensor. Your name will be written on the floor where the hole left in the floor is. They make a nice mark in the flooring material. Story 49. Used to a custodian for many years when I was leaving the lunchroom one afternoon after mopping it, walking down the hallway to the custodian closet to clean the bucket, and this annoying 6th grader that was always talking crap to everyone started talking crap to me. I don't know why I popped off, but I bopped him in the head with the end of the mop stick. He teared up and said he was going to tell the principal and his parents. I walked off, let home, and I thought the police were going to head to my house later that evening and arrest me. They never did, and I kept my job. Story 50. I practice criminal law. During a drink drive trial, I was, for some reason, using the word circumscribed during a question to a witness. However, without realizing it, what I actually said was circumcised. Twice. On break, the court reporter asked me why I said what I'd said. I didn't believe her. She played it back for me. I'd said it. Story 51. Did some minor electric work at the company warehouse. The quickest and easiest way was to stand on the table. One of the warehouse crew was nearby. Friendly guy. Kept asking me questions, and I figured he was a newbie. At one point, he suggested that doing my work on a rolling table might not be the safest thing. I smiled, winked, and whispered, "Let's just keep it between us, and I'll be done in 2 minutes." A third guy walks up and introductions were made. My newbie reveals he's head safety for my entire company. They both turn and stare at me up on this table. Luckily, he didn't take pics and turn me into a PowerPoint presentation. Story 52. Delivered the wrong furniture at a house, and they wouldn't give it back. The company I worked at didn't care. Told me to get over it even though they gave me the wrong address to deliver to. Tried to take it out of my paycheck, so I put in my 2 weeks. Story 53. I spilt a drink on the lap of a very rich American who had just told me he was on his way to Heathrow. He was wearing a cream linen suit. He had told me his baggage had gone ahead, that he was having brunch then heading to the airport. I don't think I've ever seen someone look at me with such anger in their eyes before or since. Story 54. Trusted a coworker in an industrial environment, specifically that they wouldn't be stupid or malicious enough to override the machine safety mechanism that prevents you from increasing the thermoretor temperature above 120 degrees and continuing to operate. Parts were coming off the line with a lot of splay, and my mistake was not checking the TCU temperature page and opening the door containing the mold. Story 55. Thinking that the people I hired weren't dumb enough to take a $10,000 check that was printed on an inkjet printer. Employee. In fairness, he said he didn't have his ID. Story 56. I used to make soup in a factory for a living, and you're supposed to use specific ingredients for each one because of different allergens. Anyways, I accidentally mixed 2 different totes of noodles together, which was over 1,000 pounds altogether. I was absolutely mortified by my mistake, but my boss just waved it off and calmly said not to do it again. It probably helped my case that I was one of their best workers, and it was around 140 degrees in the factory that day. Story 57. Worked at some finance company years ago that damn sucked and had put my 2 weeks notice in. On my last day, this advisor was being a banana to me, and his client was on his ass, which meant I had to make crap happen. Can't remember all the details, but over the span of 2 days, this client was closing an account by moving funds over, and I accidentally moved all the funds over instead of in 2 separate transactions. No clue why this was a problem, and honestly didn't care. I left and have no idea what happened after that. Damn that crap whole place. Story 58. Signed off a work email to an external client with kind regards, but accidentally swapped the G with a T. I wanted the ground to swallow me that day. Story 59. First job, I worked at a supermarket. Was helping out in the dairy section. Had a little roller cart stacked with gallons of milk, probably 2 wide and 5 high. So, 40 gallons of milk. Was pushing instead of pulling, and the front wheel hit a little chunk of wood that chipped off a pallet. All the milk crashed. All but maybe 6 or 7 broke open and just spread everywhere. It was a mess. Also, it was summer. Cleaned up as much as we could with mops and the floor machine, but we didn't get it all. That back stock room smelled like sour milk for a while.